The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
I heard that you are here from all different places. I heard Norton and Taunton and Connecticut, as well as some people here from our staff tonight. So welcome to Queset House at the Ames Free Library. I'm so glad that you could be here. If you're from town or from out of town, we hope you'll come back. We have a lot of exciting things coming up. This week is a lot of Halloween activities for all ages, but we also have a variety of crafts, we have board games, we have book clubs. There's something for everyone: fiction, nonfiction, science fiction, mystery. So definitely check out our calendar for that. We have some other authors coming. We have tea and tarot. We have a program about electric vehicles. Lots of good stuff, as I said, children, teens, and adults. So check our calendar on our website. This program tonight came about in a sort of very interesting way. Hopefully Peter can talk about how he ended up being here tonight.
Yeah.
Or maybe Alicia wants to. But thank you all for coming. I know you have a lot of fans here.
Oh, thank you.
Here, just to see you. So welcome.
That's nice.
And thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the warm welcome. And I feel like I'm at church. Yeah. Gonna cast a few demons out of Regan. Only kidding. No, it's like I said, it's great to be here. And yeah, the reason why I'm here is I have a connection with Alicia, because Alicia and I can't remember how we got to know one another. Something happened, and we know each other through the internet. That's reached New England now, hasn't it? Yes. Yes, certainly. And so we knew each other. And I've had a few weird kind of projects in my life. And one of them was called Creepy Cove Community Church, which is a podcast which is basically full and immersive church services broadcast from a mysterious haunted fishing town. It's like a fake church where everyone goes to this church is from a horror movie. So, like Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th does the Keep Fit class on a Thursday and that sort of stuff. It's I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, quite a few people seemed to like it, which was great. And then Alicia was helpful to do some voice work for that and helped me out with that. And then just maybe last year, I just posted online. I said, look, I want to go to Salem. And how do I do that? Does anyone have any tips? And then Alicia says, well, I've got a great tip. There's an author in residence program at my library. Would you like to come? And then you can stay for a while. And then maybe that could be a base in which to explore the area. So that's how that's worked out. So thank you, Alicia, for that. Well, I'm going to talk to you tonight about one of my books, which is a nonfiction book called The Frighteners. And I'll talk about that for a while, but then at the end of this, if you have any questions about anything else, feel free, whether that's about books or YouTube or podcasting or writing. Sometimes other authors or writers or maybe people who are just interested in that want to find out a bit more about it. So feel free to ask me about that. And can you hear me okay at the back? Wonderful. Okay, well, let me dive in first to talk to you a little bit about this nonfiction book, The Frighteners. I was speaking at a paranormal conference once. You get invited to these things, and I can't remember. I think the subject I was given was something to do with, does God believe in ghosts or something? Because my previous job used to be a church minister, and so I was talking about that at the time. And anyway, after you have these paranormal kind of seminars and lectures throughout the day, you have this like gala dinner in the evening where we're sitting in this posh dinner, and I'm sitting with other delegates. And there's this woman sat opposite me. And as she's sitting there, we're talking about all sorts, but then she whips out her phone. Let me get just in case you've forgotten what they look like. She whips out a phone, and she says, "Oh, you're not going to believe what I have been given by my boyfriend. He's made me a beautiful gift. And I was like, okay, what is it? And she started flicking through the pictures in her phone. The first picture was of her boyfriend looking all like, super macho. And he was like planing down some wood. And then the second picture was he was sawing the end off a piece of wood. And I thought, oh, maybe he's making, I don't know, like a love seat. Do you have those? Yeah. Have you noticed how they're always empty, ironically? But yeah, maybe he's making something like that. That's romantic. But then she switched to the third picture. And that's when it started taking shape. And that's when I realized it was like this, and then this. Oh, basically, I'm like, that's a coffin. And she said, yeah, it's not only a coffin, it is my coffin. He has made a coffin for me. And I think it's one of the best presents I've ever had in my life. Now, looking at this, she obviously saw my face because she said, like, what? Like, what's the problem? And I said, look, I don't want to be disrespectful. All I'm saying is that's kind of strange. I've never met anyone who was so enthusiastic about that. How would you feel if you got a partner, if they said, hey, I've sorted your coffin out this weekend? You'd be like backing off maybe.
Checking my life insurance.
Checking your life insurance, yeah, definitely.
Anything the person made.
Absolutely. But she said, look, there's nothing wrong with this whatsoever. And she showed me a picture of where the coffin is now. It's a place called Milton Keynes, the town, which is not too far from me. And the coffin now sits in her living room, and it stands upright with the lid off. And inside there is a mannequin with a black dress on, and there's a stuffed raven sitting on top of this coffin. And she just says, one day we're going to take the mannequin out, and then of course I'm going to go in and be buried, and that's that. And she said, if you think I am a weirdo for thinking that way, you've got it wrong. She said, I think you're weird. And I was like, what? She says, I think you're strange because like death and the idea of this sort of stuff, like being in a coffin one day, as dark as it sounds, she says, that's the most natural thing in the world. And to face it, but also even to find some creative way of embracing it, that is the most natural thing you can do. Now, if you think this woman is a bit unusual, well, wait till you hear about some of the other people I've been hanging out with. When I was writing this book, do you mind if I pinch it so I'll hold it up? Well, I was writing this book, The Frighteners. In this book, I travel around Transylvania and across Rome and also all throughout Britain, meeting people who are drawn to the morbid and macabre. I interviewed a real-life vampire who gave me a recipe for blood pancakes, if you're interested. I interviewed a respected barrister who writes textbooks in the UK on trademark law, but at the weekends he goes crawling around in spooky old buildings searching for ghosts. I had a cup of tea with a man who spent £2,000 on a costume so he could look like a 6-foot zombie possum with a gaping wound in his neck. Along the way, I saw 3,700 skeletons in an underground crypt in Rome, all laid out to make chandeliers and art pieces all around the room. I've been chased by zombies through an underground nuclear bunker in Essex. I've held a lock of Charles Manson's hair in my hand at a shop at a place called York, which sells it for £40 a strand. And people will put it in little lockets to have around their neck. At one point, the BBC, a TV station in Britain, the BBC blindfolded me, put me in a Jeep, a Land Rover it was. I'm obsessed with Jeeps now. I see Jeeps everywhere I look at this road here. Put me in a Land Rover and drove me out towards this mansion house, me and some other people who was part of this TV show. And as we were driving, we heard the driver freaking out. We took off our blindfolds. The driver screamed, got out of the Jeep and just ran off into the woods. We're left in the middle of nowhere, not knowing what to do. So we all get out of the car. we walk down this lane and we find a mansion. I'm not making this up. We find a mansion house. It opens the door and there is a one-eyed butler and a witch who invite us in. And for the next 12 hours, we were subjected to weird and crazy experiments to try and test and understand fear. They strapped us to electric chairs. We had dinner where we pulled out the dessert and it was filled with live spiders that were being running at us and stuff. We just saw you jerk there. A crazy night. Why, you might ask, have I been subjecting myself to these sorts of experiences? Well, it was research for this book, The Frighteners, because the book is trying to understand, why do human beings consistently want to engage with the morbid and macabre? I had the idea for the book one night in Transylvania because I was there for my 40th birthday, a long time ago. And as I was walking the snowy streets, it was snowing at the time, I was in this old Saxon village, and I'd just been told that there was wolves howling in the hills. And I was listening out for them, but I didn't see any wolves. But what I did see were some wild dogs that came around the side and they were padding in the snow. And a few of them sort of came around me in a circle. And I'm in the middle of nowhere. I'm in something like a kind of Hammer horror movie. And these dogs are coming. And I was scared. And I was like worried that something bad would happen. But you know how else I felt? I felt amazing. I was like, something special is happening here. I'm in Transylvania, home of Count Dracula. I've got wolves howling and dogs near me. This is wild. I love it. So also being scared, but also simultaneously being drawn to it. Because you see, as well as all these freaky folks I've been meeting, well, I guess I count myself as one of them, because I have liked morbid, macabre, and spooky things for as long as I can remember. Back in Britain, if someone talks to me about soccer, you know, my eyes just kind of glaze over a bit. But if someone says, oh, did you know that house over the other side of the street's haunted? Then I'm just perked up. Something about that grabs me. And I do know that it makes it a bit awkward for some people when I also explain that, well, I mean, when I wrote the book, I was working as a church pastor. I don't do that now. I mainly focus on like the creative stuff and YouTube and books and podcasts. But, you know, I have been ordained. Don't be alarmed. I'm not a fundamentalist type. I don't know if that disappoints you, but I was ordained into the Baptist denomination in Britain, and that means a very different thing in Britain than it does in America. Very, very different indeed. And so sometimes I have to unpack that because people hear the word Baptist and think, oh, right, you're a Southern Baptist. And that's no disrespect to them. I'm just saying that is not what I am. And it feels odd for a reverend, let's say, to be into this stuff. Because really, I thought, maybe many people think, vicars or pastors are supposed to be kind of professional, nice people. Well, in theory, they're supposed to be. You know, like really, I should be listening to like Amy Grant albums on a loop, and I should buy the Joel Osteen Inspiration Cube and be listening to that over and over again. But no, to be honest with you, clergy are pretty weird, like everyone else. I know a pastor who collects porcelain penguins. He's got a collection of porcelain penguins, for crying out loud. So we all have our quirks. It's just mine is, I do enjoy lifting a shotgun to, let me explain, let me finish that sentence, to a zombie in a video game and just decimating its head. I just kind of do. I like spooky things. I like horror films. I know when I watched the Blair Witch Project for the first time and people were like raving about it being really scary, and I went, right, I want to be scared by this, but not only am I going to watch it, I'm going to turn all the lights off in the house and I'm going to go and I'm going to open the back door of the house and just leave it open because it just adds a little bit of an extra zing to the evening. I'm the first person, you know, in the store when Halloween comes around to be kind of running down the Halloween aisle and, you know, trying on the masks and chasing my kids down the ready meal section. I'm also an author of novels, and if you were to ever see any of my macabre crime fiction series featuring a character called Matt Hunter, you'll see that they're pretty dark. I mean, they're quite funny at places, but they're pretty dark. In the first one, Purged, the main character's an ex-church minister turned atheist professor, and he helps the police track down Christian psychopaths and evangelical serial killers and people that have something to do with their cults and the paranormal. And in the first book, he is trying to stop a Christian killer who believes the best way to get people to go to heaven is to baptize them and then to murder them immediately afterwards, because then they won't lose their faith and then you can fast track them to heaven. So these books, they don't hold anything back. And some of them are really quite disturbing. And yet people read them. I mean, not quite enough people read them, but the crime fiction drama, crime fiction or crime dramas on TV, they're like one of the most popular genres in all the fiction or television or podcast, true crime. And let's face it, when you're reading a crime fiction book or listening to a true crime podcast, the crimes in those shows aren't like the non-payment of fines. It's not, there's an amazing new podcast out. It's about this woman. She got caught jaywalking. And there's 7 episodes. No, the crime is almost always a murder. Someone has died. I guess the point I'm trying to make at the very top is to say, if you think I'm a weirdo for thinking this, or perhaps if you think you're a weirdo, because there'd be some of you in this room, maybe a lot of you, who are like me, who are drawn to this stuff and may have had that little voice in your head saying, this isn't right, something wrong with you. Well, if you feel that way, then I'd only add that you are one of millions and millions of people throughout culture and throughout history who have been drawn to this stuff. Even if you go to a Disney film or a Pixar film, I'm always checking my watch thinking it's normally at the 12th minute when the parents die, and sets up the drama of the film. Something bad happens. Even if you watch cozy crime, like Murder, She Wrote or Columbo, they're great, those shows, but they all revolve around a corpse. If you go through a historical site, just watch how the crowds can sort of get bored when they say, and, this wood here is from Senegal. And if you'll notice, the balustrades here were designed. And don't get me wrong, some people get into that. But some people are like, okay. And then they say, oh, and of course, this is the room in which the maid murdered the butler. Just in that corner. And then you all look there. And then just see people's faces oh, right, okay. People start looking up from their phones. I'll be in Salem for Halloween. Why do people flock to Salem every Halloween? It's not for the 18th century gas lamps. Or 19th maybe, as pretty as they are. It's because scary and frankly hideous and wrong things happened there. But there's something about it that makes us interested in them. Think of the literature that we cherish, Beowulf, the Iliad, Crime and Punishment, Titus Andronicus, the Divine Comedy. All of these worthy classics are filled with brutal violence. There's an American literary critic called Leslie Fielder, and he says that these tales endure not in spite of the shocking darkness in them, but precisely because of them. In 2012, the UK Department of Transport invested £2.3 million in buying 105 large incident screens, they called them, to stop motorists seeing car crashes. Now, you might think that was because they were being kind and sensitive. They didn't want people to be driving to work and see something horrific, so they wanted to block it off. That's not why. The reason they did it was because they were noticing that when there were crashes, there was more traffic jams and even more subsequent crashes because so many people were slowing down to look. They wanted to cover up these crashes so that people couldn't see it because they knew people would want to see it. Gawping at accidents is one of the most predictive human behaviors, even in children. Speaking of children, in the book, there's a whole chapter on where the kids need scary entertainment. And I interviewed an elementary school teacher about kids and the macabre. And the very day when I was interviewing her, someone came into the office and said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, but the children, they're all gathering on the lawn outside, and we need to get them back in, but they're not coming. And she says, like, what's the problem? And they says, they found a dead bird. Yeah. And they all go like, not like Children of the Corn style, they're just they're not like, let's eat it. No, they're there because they're just drawn to this stuff. So what's going on? And I don't just mean with me and those kids and the world, but yes, perhaps with you or your loved ones and the millions of other people, nice folk who wouldn't dream of killing anybody or hurt anyone or wouldn't like to see a real life thing in front of them and yet are fascinated by this stuff. Well, the first thing to get in your head is to realize that it's, statistically speaking, being into the morbid is normal. And by normal, I mean statistically normal. Humans have always had this morbid streak, from the gladiator battles of ancient Rome to public executions in medieval times, to the blood sacrifice motifs at the hearts of so many religions. I don't know if any of you are religious or you know people who are and, walking around with like a crucifix around their neck and don't quite maybe realize how messed up that is when you think about it. It's the equivalent would be if you went to your mom and said, happy Mother's Day, I bought you some electric chair earrings. Because, the cross is a form of execution and brutal at that. But Christianity somehow takes a symbol that is barbaric and horrible and has hope within it. Some Christian people tell me I shouldn't be into morbid things and say that I've got a problem, or might even say that I'm possessed, because I'm not, as far as I'm aware, but I have had that experience. I have went into I did get interviewed once on a radio station, a Christian radio station, and later one of the sound engineers who knew me got in touch and says, did you know the presenter sent an email around to everyone before you came in because she wanted to have a prayer team to pray for protection because she thought you're going to bring in some sort of demonic vibe. She wasn't into Harry Potter. She thought that was bad, so her head would spin off if she saw the stuff I watched. But some people say it's wrong. But even the Bible itself is a deeply horrific and shocking text. It's packed with hope and love and wonderful things. But look at the shocking murders in Judges, tent pegs right through their head, or some of the darker parables of Jesus, or not least the book of Revelation, where there's monsters that are just doing the craziest stuff. There's one point where there's a woman about to give birth, and as she's giving birth, this creature, monster thing is like crouching between her legs, waiting for the baby to be born, just so it can eat it. That's not very nice. And yet there it is in the Bible. It suggests to me... Oh, so you got a question?
I was just going to say, even for Jesus, when we go to church, we drink his blood and eat his flesh, kind of like vampires.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so the Eucharist or communion, or however you want to call it, we lose track of how wild that sounds. Eat his flesh and drink his blood. I'm washed in the blood of the Lamb. That sounds a bit messed up. It suggests that if God exists, and by the way, he might not. I'm one of those Christian people who is quite open to the possibility that it's just not true. And I know that for some people can find that a bit weird and think it's not possible to be that. But personally, I don't think you have to 100% choose one or the other. We're all on kind of a spectrum of belief, and I'm more towards I think the supernatural, and there is something else in this world, but I don't know for certain, so I don't know. But if God does exist, God seems to use darker shades to express things in the Bible. And so if we are made in the image of God, like the Bible says, then is it a shock to find that we also have a compulsion to share ideas through darker shades? The sheer consistency of grisly culture should make us realize that it's typical of people. It's not an anomaly. The principal said in all of her years, she's had maybe a handful of kids say, I don't want to learn about the Black Death because it creeps me out. I don't want to do the Great Fire of London because there's too many people dying in it. She says, maybe 5 people in all of my 30 years of teaching. But she says everyone else is like, that's their favorite lesson. The bit when they dissect something, many of them, freak out at that, understandably. But if they bring like a skeleton of an animal in or something, people get interested in it. Well, why is this happening? I think we've established that it's happening and that it's quite normal, but why? Well, here's just a few kind of brief brushstrokes to explain why. Well, firstly, something primordial in us tells us that this stuff is useful, that it's actually useful for us to ponder these things. Just imagine if our ancestors had not exercised their fear muscles. So imagine, it's like one of our ancestors walking down through the jungle or whatever, and out leaps a saber-toothed tiger and rips off one of his arms, and he's not scared of it. And he's like, oh, pretty interesting day. Goes back to the camp, doesn't bother telling anyone else, or just says, oh, it's no big deal. Next day, he goes back to the same spot. Tiger comes out, rips off the other arm. He's going back and never like internalizing the shock and fear of it. We would never survive in that sort of environment. So what does he do? He does what is natural for a group to do. And it's to come back and warn everyone and say that there's badness out there in the dark. And not only will that person warn other people, but they will even exaggerate it and sit around the campfire. And it's useful to do this, to say to the children, did you know, if you go out into the darkness after a certain time, there is a beast out there, he'll get you. It will get you, especially if you've been naughty. They might add some moralistic thing into it. But that's how we survive, sometimes with the threat of what might be out there in the darkness. So there's a usefulness to it. So if you ever are driving on a highway and you do, unfortunately, you might have done it, you might have had this before, but if you see like a motorway smash, and it can be quite traumatic, but if you find yourself wanting to stare, you're like fighting your chin, oh God, I want to look. It's not because you're sick. There's nothing wrong with you at all. I've heard some churchgoers say, that's the devil. That's the devil making you want to look so you'll be pleased with death. No, it's not. It's your brain is hungry for information. And it wants to, it's looking and it's seeing a situation that you are currently in. That person was on a road, you're in a road, they're in a car, we're in a car, you're in a car. Your brain says, hang on a minute, I think we need to gather as much information as possible because this shouldn't happen to me. I don't want this to happen to me. It's wise to gather as much data as possible. And what happens when you see something like that? When you do look, well, your speedy journey doesn't feel quite as important as it did 5 minutes ago. You slow down. You stop texting at the wheel. The horror of it shocks us into wisdom. It's why the author Stephen King kept a scrapbook logging the crimes of the notorious serial killer Charlie Starkweather. And King was asked if his fascination meant he supported the crime. And he was like, no, I just want to learn what someone like that looks like. So if I ever meet them, I can run away. Well, as well as being useful, the scary and macabre is also just plain interesting. Not to everybody. Some people are off-put by it, and I respect that. But many, many people, millions, love it. Look at Halloween, just walk around. People love this stuff. Well, why is it interesting? Well, compared to our ancestors, modern life is incredibly safe. Most of us, thankfully, do not witness violence and death on a daily basis. I say most of us, because unfortunately, it's not all of us. There are parts of the world where people are getting up every day and they know they are going to see violence and death, even of their loved ones. So let's not be naive. This sort of stuff does happen. But in Britain, and in America on the whole, you're not seeing that when you walk out of your house in a morning. In fact, many people have not even seen a dead body before. I was going to ask you to put your hands up if you've seen a dead body, but I don't know if that feels a bit weird. But feel free to. Has anyone seen a dead body in here? Okay, so there's a few of you, but some of you may not have, and that's quite normal. Quite normal. Contrast that with the Victorian age or the Gilded Age, perhaps, where people might have sat alongside their dead relatives for a photograph with memento mori, a technique where they would take pictures of the dead to remember them. They would proudly display these memento mori shots on their mantelpiece. A selfie with their dead granny might sound a little bit crass and weird, but no, it's meaningful. Remember back then, they didn't have 1 terabyte of space on their iPhone 16. They couldn't fill millions. Let's take millions of granny while she's alive. They might only ever afford one photograph, and when are they going to use it? So, she's gone. Let's do it, and let's take a picture now. Sometimes even the granny's pictures of the picture of the dead granny might even have her eyes open, which is kind of weird. This idea would be absolutely unthinkable today and taboo. Have you seen how when you've got pictures of people, if they go to a funeral and they take a photograph of themselves next to, and people are like, ugh, it's disgusting, shocking. It would be unthinkable today. Why? It's because we have learned to hide death. In the book, I chart how since Victorian times, the dead body has moved from the parlor at home into the funeral parlor. And then did you notice we stopped calling it the parlor, and then we started calling it the living room because we don't want it to have anything to do with that stuff, thanks. Corpses started to vanish from public life. We didn't see them anymore. In the 18th century, we saw the advent of the life insurance industry. Meant that people had more cash to spend on funerals. More cash meant more undertakers spotting a good business opportunity. Gradually, they took control of the bodies. By the 19th century, advances in medicine meant we understood contamination, so the dying or the dead were quite rightly separated from the living. But even executions, which had often been public, started to take place behind closed doors. And so death and dying became, invisible to us. But we still know it's there. And so what do? We do something I think that's actually quite clever and quite genius. We start to surround ourselves with simulations of death. We start to figure out, I need to engage with this, but I don't want to do it in a way that's too much. From crime novels to horror films to Halloween scare attractions, we create memento mori we can handle. We say, I'm not suggesting let's get real dead bodies back in the lounge. Not at all. I don't want to wake up and have my Special K and see my granny sat there in the corner. All right. No, thanks. But if we think that we were going to remove these things, we're not going to stop thinking about them. And so we start to examine them in forensic detail. The declining visibility of death in front of us has led to really elaborate expressions in art and culture. Has anyone watched the Terrifier films? About I got it. I write a film column in the UK, so I got invited to the premiere for Terrifier 3 a few weeks ago in London. The London premiere, and I was there with the staff. So not the staff. That's not what you call them. The cast. The cast. Not the staff. The cast were there watching the film for the very first time. Right. So I'm sat there. They're watching it. Even they were struggling to watch their own film because they hadn't seen all the effects. 11 people walked out of that Leicester Square screening. One person threw up. We were all given Terrifier 3 vomit bags on the way in, which I've still got 2 of them in my office. Just kind of think they're kind of cool. But the point is, it was shocking stuff. But that's my point. It's like the death goes, and so we start to find ever more elaborate ways to have it in a different way, a palatable way. There's a journalist called Vicky Goldberg who describes it beautifully. She says, there has been the decline of death, but the ascent of its image. Well, not only can it be interesting and useful and all these sorts of things. But also, the morbid can give us a sense of power and even comfort in the face of our mortality. There is a chapter in the book called The Beast Within, where I explore how culture has been fascinated with monsters. I've always liked monsters. And let's do a straw poll. What do you think's the scariest? Do you think like vampire, werewolf, or demon? Demon? Like anyone up for werewolf? Vampire? Yeah, one for vampire. Some people are attracted to vampires, so that's one of the things I talk about in the book. But yeah, I was talking about vampires, werewolves, and demons in that book. Actually, on the demon section, I talk about the rise in demand for exorcism. I don't know if you're aware of that, but the demand for the exorcism ritual is really going up at the moment. So much so that the Vatican are having trouble keeping up with the demand for exorcism. Now, some people might say that's because the devil himself is on the march. There are other alternative explanations to do with the stigma of mental health, and that some people may actually find it, unfortunately, because mental health issues can have so much stigma, people can feel like if they're given a diagnosis, I don't know, like depression or anxiety, that, oh, that's my fault because it comes from inside me. It reminds me of, like, I don't know if this happened to you, but when I was at school, whenever I would get a zit, you call them in this country, zit, spots, acne. Yeah. Whenever I would get one of those on my face, I would feel really, really embarrassed to go to school. And I would just be, everyone's going to look at me and stuff. And, I don't want to go to school. But if I had the same mark and it was from falling off my bike, I didn't care. And I was, why? It's the same mark. It's the same like blemish, if you want to call it that. They look pretty much the same. Even if the mark off my bike was bigger, I'd be happy to have that, but not the other one. And I kind of pondered this, and I realized it was because in my messed up thinking, or maybe it's common thinking, I thought, well, falling off my bike and scratching myself, that wasn't my fault. That was an accident. But having that spot somehow came from me. That's my fault. That's a reflection on me, which is not the right way of thinking, by the way, because if you have those, that's just life. But that's one of the reasons it could be why people struggle with being diagnosed with certain labels, because they wrongly think it's got something to do with they blame themselves. And if you're very religious or open to religious things, there is an option to say, well, maybe the reason why I'm thinking this way or acting in an unusual way is not because of something in me, but an invader from the outside, a demon, if you will. And there's a ritual that can get rid of it, which is a nice thought as well. So anyway, so that's an aside. But yes, exorcism is pretty trendy today. A few years ago it was fidget spinners. Now it's the ancient ritual of exorcism. But anyway, I explore this book in the chapter on beasts. And at that point, I was the beginning of that chapter is when I went for a werewolf hunt in a place called Hull. Because apparently a kind of 7-foot hairy beast was spotted roaming the city and the waterways of the city, and even was spotted by 2 witnesses grabbing a German Shepherd dog and dragging it over a fence. And so I went up with a friend, a person I got to know through this, a historian, and we both went out looking for this werewolf. Now, please don't get me wrong, it's not a proper hunt. We didn't have like shotguns and stuff like that. To be honest, we just went to the local supermarket. I bought some peppered steak and I just opened a thing and I tied some string around it. We just dragged that up and down the waterway for a bit to see what would happen. But anyway, as we were doing this, Mike, who's this historian, said to me, by the way, I had a diagnosis recently about my heart. And I could drop dead at any minute. I'm in trouble. And I'm like, crap, why didn't you tell me this before I took you on a werewolf hunt? If we see something, you could keel over. But he said something I'll never forget. I said, well, man, I'm so sorry. That's scary. He had a young family, like I had a young family. I said, that's scary and hard. And how are you dealing with that? How did you face that? And he said, well, after I found out, I got in touch with someone who knows another person who's connected to a funeral home that is closing down. And I was able to get permission to go in there and sleep on a mortuary slab for the night. I was like, oh, right. I thought you meant you were going to like just, get a bit of therapy or something, or, just go away for the weekend and relax. I didn't mean that, but no, he said, yes, he did that. And again, it was similar to the woman I mentioned at the beginning. He said, no, that's a lot to deal with. I want to face it in a way I can control. In the weeks and months after 9/11, kids of the affected families were observed to be playing some disturbing games. They would build planes out of Lego and then build Lego buildings. And they would be seen smashing the planes into the Lego towers over and over again. They build them back up, smash them again. And some of the adults around them at the time were saying, like, what are you doing? This is sick. Your parent died in that. This is not how you deal with this. You've got to stop. You've got to stop this, especially when they would do it in such a rhythmic, kind of almost mindless pattern. And so they were told to stop until child psychologists came along and they said, don't you dare tell them to stop. They said, do you have any idea what they're going through? They have just been, and they've been thrown in to not only the chaos of losing a parent, but also they have become now part of this story that everyone is talking about that has shook the entire planet. And you think that these little kids are going to be able to articulate how they feel about this? And do you also think that they're not going to even think about this stuff and just ignore it? No, they're not. They said, leave them be. What they're doing is they are, in their own way, taking the things that disturb, scare, and terrify them, and they are putting them into predictable patterns that they can do over and over again. And when you do that, it gives you a strange kind of mastery over the things that scare you. I think that's what I'm doing, I'll be honest. When I write macabre and creepy novels or do like YouTube videos about the supernatural, the paranormal, I don't do that because I think killing in real life is fun. I'm not like rubbing my knees every time I hear about a murder. And it's also not that I'm so blasé about the supernatural that I don't find it scary. I find it scary, especially if I'm by myself. I have been, frankly, a bit nervous about coming here to sleep in this building because the third floor is supposed to be haunted, and guess where I'm sleeping? I sleep in there on the first night. Some kind of weird happened up there. I'll tell you about it. I was tired, right? Because when I came in at the airport, I had to go through immigration. And when I said I was like staying in the library, they looked at me like, that doesn't sound right. So I got sent to this room and I had to sit next to this guy in chains, for chains around his ankles, his leg. There's this officer coming around with his gun, like pointing at the gun and telling him to sit down. And I'm like sitting there like, hi. It was kind of interesting and fun in a way once I left. But when I was in there, I'm like, oh, what's going to happen? Anyway. So when I got here, I was tired. And at that point, I hadn't been able to collect a hire car, a rental. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to be staying in this big house by myself, and I've got no escape if something funky happens. And because I'm going to do a YouTube video on this place, I'd been like reading up on some of the weird things that are happening, but not all of them, because I decided, no, I need to get some more information from a woman called Jess, and Jess hadn't sent me all the information. So I knew a tiny bit, but not much. Anyway, on the first night, I went to bed, and I decided to keep the lights on, right? Because, spooky and all. This might not be a big deal to you. It was a big deal to me. I'm lying in bed, and I kind of opened my eyes because I can feel something. I couldn't hear anything because I wear these kind of funky earphones at night, like sleep headphones. So like noise in my ears, so I can't hear anything other than like this nice like spa music and stuff. So I couldn't hear anything. So what woke me up was I felt two hands clasping around my ankles and my shins on the bed. And as I felt that, I felt whatever these hands were doing this. Like pushing my legs up and down at the bottom of the bed. And it woke me up and I could feel myself going like this. And so I kept my eyes cut shut tight because I was like, I don't want to open my eyes. And then anyway, I was like, come on, you got to do this. I opened my eyes, and as I opened my eyes, there was nothing at the end of the bed, and my feet calmed down. Now, maybe it was a hypnagogic hallucination, a kind of half dream. It could have been that. All I'm saying is, like, I have never in my entire life ever felt something like that, sleep, ever. It was like weird. So anyway, I managed to fall back asleep eventually. And then about an hour later, I felt something climbing in the bed. And like the bed going down a bit, not dramatically, you know, it wasn't, but I felt something like seeping down, and then something like rolling on top of me. Again, I kept my eyes closed for a bit, I opened my eyes, and then there was nothing there, and it went away. Now that second one could be sleep paralysis. I do know that people can have that experience where they feel a pressure on the chest. Maybe it was just that. But this was like all down my body, and I still can't figure out how sleep paralysis would explain the legs thing. The next day I went in the library and I told one of the librarians about it, and she said, that's really interesting because another person who stayed in that room said something similar-ish happened to her at 3 a.m. in the morning, which is when I had that experience. Did I enjoy that? No. Do I enjoy it now that I'm telling you about it? Yeah. See what I mean? I take the thing that's scary, and I'm now in control. I tell you about it, and I'm not scared anymore. That might be what those kids were doing. That's what I am doing. Well, you might think, and as you start like wrapping things up, you might think that a truly enlightened species would get rid of the morbid from both real life and art. But no, I'm not convinced by that argument. In 1980, an anthropologist called Bruce Knauft studied a remote New Guinea tribe called the Gabusi tribe. And they're an interesting tribe because initiation rites in that tribe are completely pain-free, and violent, scary stories are forbidden. They're not even allowed to tell scary stories in that, or violent ones. And you think, oh, right, let's aim for that. That's what some of the, maybe like some Christians I know in Britain would say, that's what we need. We don't want R-rated movies. We want everything to be kid-friendly. Well, the Gabusi tribe also have one of the highest homicide rates of any known culture, because they don't have these opportunities to release, to have an outlet for this aggression. So, The Frighteners, that book, was my attempt to understand what our macabre tendencies can teach us about humanity, society, and yeah, even spirituality. You know, I wasn't always a Christian. There's a new Into the Fog coming on Saturday, and it's where I tell the paranormal thing that happened to me when I was a teenager. And that was, well, I look forward to see what you think of it, because that was really crazy. But when I was a teenager, I was like super anti-church. Like I was in a band at the time called Creatures of the Night. And I used to write the songs, and there were songs like, I wrote a song called Diabolo, which is all about like upturning your cross and spitting on the Bible and God being a loser and all this sort of angry young man stuff. People are shocked to think I kind of ended up going to church later in life. But no, I wasn't always into that stuff. But you know what made me become more interested in it was watching horror movies. It was watching The Exorcist, for example, and I heard all of these Christians saying, don't watch that, it's blasphemous, it's of the devil. And then I discovered The Exorcist was banned in Tunisia on the basis of it being Christian propaganda. Because when you watch it, it is so blatantly pro-church or pro-God. And it just made me think, hang on, what happens if amongst the shadowy fear stuff, there's some hope too? I don't know. But that's my point. People can think that the morbid and macabre can only take things away from us or make us scared, especially young people, kids. Don't let my son asked me for a bedtime story and it scared him. And so he asked it again the next night. So obviously I won't tell him the story. He was scared the night before. He goes, no, he asked for the story again. Don't you understand? He's learning courage. Tell him the story. If he's asked for it, tell him again. That's courage. He wants to get in the arena and learn. Well, this stuff can make us connected to other people. It can make us feel like we're friends. You know, if we don't really know each other that well, but I tell you what, if we got snowed in tonight and we all had to hang out here tonight and it was like a hurricane or something really intense, we would be best of friends by tomorrow morning. Because there's something about shared trauma that connects you. You get stuck in the lift with another person for an hour, you're like Bezzy mates after that, because you're going to be connected. The similar thing happens when you watch a horror film. There's some sort of connection. So to conclude, let me say this. People might dismiss the morbid and macabre, and yet I don't tend to do that, because I think even though the presence of the morbid in our culture certainly does shock, I do think those reminders of our mortality can prompt us to embrace life and to find a joy in the midst of the scary stuff, as the supernatural threads of ghost stories and horror movies can be surprisingly comforting. I've been shocked at the thing with Into the Fog, my YouTube show, at how many emails I'm getting from people who say, thank you for these scary stories. They're helping me through a tough time. And I'm like, wow. I just got contacted by a family who were displaced during the hurricanes. And he was like, we have fallen apart. Like, it's been the worst time of our lives. I think people appreciate what it's like to lose your house and everything. He says, it has been an absolute nightmare. And he says, but we've really found it helpful to sit and listen to you talking about horrible, scary things. I share that story just to say, don't be surprised if you find a strange sense of comfort in this dark stuff. And if you do, it doesn't make you a freak or a strange person at all. It just makes you like a million other people in this world who have found something valuable at the heart of scary culture. The end. Yeah, cool. Well, should we open it up to questions? General knowledge? No, like questions obviously relevant. Does anyone have any questions about anything?
I'm curious how you found Easton and found this, like I found you on YouTube about a month ago, because around this time of year I like to listen to spooky stuff.
Oh, cool.
It's mostly like fake crap on the...
Oh, yeah.
So when I found your show, I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And then I ended up finding a little TikTok, and it was your face, so I clicked on it.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, I'm coming to the U.S. I'm like, I'm saying to my husband, oh, she's coming to the U.S. I'm coming to Massachusetts. I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Coming to the library in Easton, my house was the first Lutheran church built in 1795, and it used to sit where Ames Free Library.
No way. Wow.
So I was like, this is weird.
It's meant to be.
This is really weird. So that's why. So I was like curious, like, how did you?
Mainly because I always wanted to go to Salem, and so I'd planned to visit Salem anyway. And then I knew Alicia, who works at the library, and yeah, when I asked for tips on traveling to Salem, Alicia said, well, they have an author in residence program here, which means you can come and stay in the spooky haunted Lake House. We're at the top. Yeah, you didn't mention that bit. And so, yeah, that's through my friend Alicia. That's how I found out.
The town, it's not just when I actually came to the library back in 2016, because I had a ghost in my house, actually.
Oh.
And, I think I moved to Easton when I was like 11 months old, and I was in a Fascinate in my parents' room, and then they put me in my own room. And there was a man that would come out at night and keep me up all hours, and I didn't know if it was real. I thought it might have been, not an imaginary friend, but just this man that I would see in my room that wasn't in my family. And so I went to the library. I was like 46, and I'm like, I'm gonna get to the bottom of this and see if this is real. And so I ended up, because I had his name and stuff, and I ended up getting the information, and he's actually buried at the cemetery that's on North Main Street up the road there. But I had to find the information and like find his grave and just research it basically. And I've had so many supernatural stories and ghosts and this, that, and the other that I don't need to get into here, but I'm saying I believe that the land, because it's it's Native American land and all the King Philip's lore and all that stuff, and it's in the we used to hang out by the Hockomock Swamp, and it was just normal to us because we grew up in this town. And but I believe just the land is very haunted, and also if you went to school in this town, which I did, there's so many dead kids buried in cemeteries.
Really?
Everything under the sun. I don't think it was from Easton, but so many. I believe it's just a haunted town.
A haunted town. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. Anyone else got any questions?
Is this your first trip to the States?
It's not my first trip to the States. I've been to LA, San Francisco, well, that side, San Francisco, that sort of area, and Florida, of course, with kids, and Epcot.
The first time up this way.
Yeah, I really like it.
You need to come back next year and see some more sites.
I'd like to, yeah.
I was mentioning to you before about the cemetery down in Plymouth.
Oh, yes, yeah.
My husband and I were on a haunted tour or something?
Yeah, it was around Halloween. They do like a haunted tour.
And it's reportedly very haunted grounds, and it's one of the oldest cemeteries. I don't remember what they...
In the United States.
In the United States.
Right.
So the pilgrims are buried.
Pilgrims.
Okay.
And we were walking through, and he took a photograph of me, and I can email it to you.
Do.
But you've seen it, I think, Alicia.
Probably.
Yeah. And describe...
I took 3 photos in a row that were very similar. The same subject, to Michelle and a few friends of ours. And the second one in the series, there's all these blurred lights running through the image. And it...
super bright, like orange, yellow.
All right.
And all the background light. I mean, there's all sorts of movement.
Nothing...
Oh, is this with a digital camera?
No, it was a film camera, but the prior frame and the frame after.
Oh, we're fine.
Yeah.
And just this one, it looked like almost as if you had taken the camera and shaken it on a long exposure. But the main subject of the photo, the 3 women, were all perfectly
interesting.
Sharp focus. And
it wasn't like The Omen, was it? Where there's like a line going across that or something.
This is very strange.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Did we get a tour of the spooky floor?
Yes. Yeah. Funnily enough, I was going to ask if anyone. Am I allowed to show them upstairs? Is that?
As long as you're with them at all times?
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah. Yes, if anyone wants to come up and I'll show you where the leg action happened. That sounds bad. Where that thing happened. I'd be delighted to show you. Any other questions? Yep.
Have you ever played with a Ouija board?
Yes, many times. I made one for my woodwork project at school. And so, when I was at school, I was pretty obsessed with the Ouija board for a while. And my friends and I used to use it, and then I started using it by myself. And then I would take it on holiday, and I would build just makeshift ones from bits of paper and glass. And I used it, quite a bit, and it would move. But it's possible there's something called the ideomotor effect, where you can move things without being conscious of moving them. In the same way as like if, I don't know, if your phone was on the side there and it fell, your hand can reach to get it before you've even thought about it, like that. But there are some weird Ouija board stories. I do have a video on my channel actually about some shocking Ouija board stories. But yeah, I have done it. But I don't do it anymore. But I did back then. Have you?
I have. I haven't had anything weird happen.
Okay.
I had, and I won't use one ever.
You won't. Right.
Yeah, it was freaky.
It's interesting. I went to college in Boston, Emerson College.
Oh yeah.
And, they used to be, when I went to school there many years ago, they were in a different part of the city than they are now. Now they're very centralized up around the theater building they bought when I was in school. But before that, they were down on the other side of the Boston Common, down towards Kenmore Square, running over many blocks. And they had a old hotel building that was one of the dorms. It was the freshman dorm. And in the student handbook, it said, if you're in that dorm, you're not allowed to have a Ouija board. Nothing about any of the other dorms.
Oh, just that one.
That one, absolutely forbidden. Every student who, everybody, they all had them. They all had them. But every student who lived in that dorm had stories about paranormal activity in that place.
Yeah, interesting.
I went to Rhode Island recently, Providence.
Yes.
So RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. One of their dorms is a former funeral parlor. And
I went there.
See that one?
Yeah, I spoke to someone who lives there.
Someone who put the bed on the platform. And they're like, oh, this is a nice platform, and that's what it was. That's a fun little.
Yeah, I went there because H.P. Lovecraft was his funeral was there, and so I found the address. And because I'm making this YouTube video, I'm outside, like filming like that, trying to get some cool shots. And then I saw this woman come out and sit on the steps, and I just says, "Oh, what's this used for now?" And she says, "It's our dorm." And I went, "Crap!" And I was like, "I'm so sorry. I was looked like a weird perv, you know." Like, she said it was fine, but yeah. So that's weird living in a funeral parlor. I wonder if they've got some stories. Anyone else?
We live in a haunted house.
You live in a haunted house. You got all the haunts.
Not anymore. Nothing's happened.
Have you had it exercised?
Nothing that's bad that I would bother with, but we also have, we have a haunted photograph that hangs above our living room couch.
Is it a crying boy?
No.
Oh, crying boy, yeah.
It's a panorama. It's about 3 or 4 feet long?
I know, it's about 5 feet.
5 feet long.
It's all big. The veterans of the First World War in the next town over from where we live. And in the first anniversary of the armistice, they all got together, most of them in uniforms. A few women who were like nurses and things. And they stood there and they used to have this technology where they could take these they put the camera on a timer and it would
like a panoramic type thing.
So it winds up being this long, not tall photo. And so all these veterans pose for this one guy at one end who's sitting there and he looks very angry. And our dogs,
almost demonic.
Every dog we've ever had since we bought that photo will focus on that side of the photo and growl at it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very odd.
You have to keep checking the photos. Like there's a great M.R. James story called The Mezzotint, where the guy gets this painting and he puts it on, it's just of a house. And then he goes in a few days later and he says, I can't remember seeing that shadow that was there a few days ago. Well, and he goes away and he comes back and then he sees this shadow. It's like this figure kind of moving across the lawn in front of the house. And then every day he comes in and it's just moving further and further across the lawn and he thinks he's going crazy. And then he notices like underneath the figure's arms, like this weird like demon-y type figure, there is a baby. And it's like stealing a baby from the house. And then he kind of looks into the the house's history and, baby died in the house or something like that. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, on that note, so that started all spooky and just like went all like a firework going off there. Right, if anyone wants to know about Creepy Cove, because I had some postcards, feel free to take some. And if you would like to come up and see just the spooky room, you're very welcome. You've got to stay with me at all times though.
I'll show you the room.
Please. Yeah, you come up with us and show us. But other than that, thank you so much for coming out. It's been fun chatting to you all. Appreciate you coming.
Thanks,